Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar on best practices in user administration within TestRail. Today we'll be going over all of the different options for adding and managing users in your TestRail instance, and we'll highlight some new and improved features in the user management area and talk a bit about a couple of our enterprise-specific features, SSO and project level administrators. This is going to be an intermediate webinar that's geared towards administrators specifically. We won't be going over many of the day-to-day end user activities, and only full administrators will be able to see and access all of the options and details that we'll be going over today. I will be mostly demonstrating in a live TestRail cloud instance, so fingers crossed everything goes smoothly, and let's go ahead and jump in. So these are the key topics that we're going to be covering today. We're going to be working on adding users, either individually in bulk and how that system works. We're going to be managing our users, how to sort, filter, deactivate, and forget, and do some different bulk options. We're going to get into the different roles, the individual permissions that each role can have, and how to use user groups effectively. We're also going to talk about some advanced features like their security settings, getting into SSO and project level administrators. And we're also going to, if we have some time, we are going to try to jump in and do some Q&A towards the end. My name is Jacob Scott. I'm a sales and solutions engineer with TestRail. I've been with the company for several years now, very familiar with the product itself, and I work pretty closely with basically all of our different teams here. So let's go ahead and jump right in. And this is our brand new fresh instance. We don't have a ton going on here. Like I mentioned, there's nothing There's nothing that's been added. We don't have any projects, test cases, or anything like that. We're just going to jump in and immediately start managing our users. So let's go ahead and add a user here. And this is kind of the add an individual user. So if you're wanting to just create one user, you only need to put in one person at a time. This is how you're going to set it up. So we first want to do the name of the user. I'm just going to name this one after myself here. And we are going to want to add an email address. The email address is very important inside of our instance here, as this is what is going to be the unique identifier. No two users can have the same email address. They can have all of the same other details, but they do need to have a unique email address. Below here, we do have all of these different options here. These are going to kind of default to whatever the system default is. Each of your users will have the option to change these themselves. So you don't need to go in and actually make sure that you have their time zone set correctly, or you have their language or locale like set up individually for each user. Each user will have the option to do that themselves. Now, two things to note: you can set an invite directly to them, or if you want to manually specify a password for yourself, you can set that up as well, so you don't have to do each, you don't have to set up an invite to each user. We do recommend doing the invite for the most part. In my case right now, I'm just going to use the manually specified password, since this is going to be an account for myself. Just a couple of other things to take a look at here as you are working in an individual user's page. If you go over to the Access tab, this is going to be where you can define a user role. You'll see there's 5 default roles to choose from. We're going to go ahead and keep this one on lead for right now. This checkbox here is whether or not the user is active. If a user is marked as inactive, they won't be able to log in. They won't be able to access the instance, and they'll also not count towards the seat count on your monthly billing. Below that, we do have the ability to grant a user administrative privileges. I should note that when you check the box to give a user administration privileges, it really just gives them access to this administration panel. If you set up an administrator that has no access or that has read-only access, those users still won't be able to interact with any of the artifacts inside of TestRail. They'll, if you've got read-only, they'll be able to log in and view everything, but they won't actually be able to make any changes or do anything except for in this administration menu. So that is just to say, administrators are bound by the permissions that the role that they have, that dictates. So they can't just go in and automatically do everything if they have an administrator privileges. So we are going to keep this one as a lead here. All right, so moving on, we've got, you can set up groups. We'll get a little bit more into groups in a moment, but if you do have users that have a group, then you can update that there. And I do want to highlight this projects tab. There's not going to be anything in here since we don't have any projects yet, but if I jump over into a different instance that does have some projects set up, and I go ahead and edit one of my users here, if I jump over to this projects tab, you can see all of the projects here. I can assign the project, which is part of project level administrators, which we'll go over in a little bit here. But I can also, for each individual user, change their access permissions for that project. So if I do want to update a user's project settings and what role that user has within that project, I can do that on a per project basis, just directly in the user page. And that's a newer feature that was added with TestRail 6.7. All right, so let's go ahead and finish adding this user. Now, another thing I want to highlight while we're here is the ability to add multiple users at one time. So you can jump in and add a number of users in bulk. We've got a lot of users that we're adding here. You can see that the formatting does need to be their full first and last name, separated by a comma, and then their email address. It will give you a nice little preview of what the user information is going to look like here. And then if I want to, I can also jump in and configure some of the additional fields. So if these are users that are all going to be a specific language or a specific location, I can update that for them at one time. I can also change what role all of these users have. If I want to make sure that these are just kind of tester users, they're not going to have those lead permissions. And once we have groups, we can also set up groups here. And then we can also send invitation emails to our users. Otherwise, I would need to manually specify passwords for each one of them. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this right now, but just because we don't want to send a bunch of fake email addresses. But let's go ahead and add our multiple users. This is done. All right. Let's go ahead and return to our users and roles page. So now we've got all of our users present in one location, ready to go ahead and log in once they're set up. So a couple things I did want to highlight on this page. These are other new improvements that we've added into the system. We do have this awesome search bar here. So if there's a specific user that I am looking for, I can just type their first name. I can also, let's jump over to this instance here. Let me go back to my users page. So we've got a number of different users that have different email addresses. So we can, if we're searching for a specific user based on their email address, I can go ahead and type that in and have that filtered directly. All right, one thing I do want to highlight is if you are looking at a user, if I go into edit a user, let's go ahead and pick on this person. If I edit a user, there's a couple different things that change from the create a user. So all of the user access, all of these tabs up at the top, they're going to be exactly the same. The two key features here are these actions that are on the right side. These do not show up when you're adding a user for the first time. So we can either force a password change. This means that when next time they attempt to log in, it is going to automatically tell them, hey, you need to update your password, choose a new password now. And then you can also forget a user. So when you are forgetting users, what this does is It's essentially the same as removing or deleting a user in TestRail. What it does is removes any identifying information and then replaces all of the information like their name and their email address with a like an epoch timestamp of exactly when they were forgotten. So one of the key benefits of using TestRail is traceability of interactions with your testing assets. So forgetting a user is going to maintain the full history of everything that user did inside of the system rather than removing them and removing all trace of them. So we do want to keep that traceability present and available, but just to make sure that we are compliant with global privacy and security standards, we do want the ability to completely remove all identifying information. So let's go ahead and forget this user just to demonstrate here. And now you will see it automatically replaces their name and email address with this timestamp, so we know exactly when they were forgotten. And if we go over into the Access tab, we'll see that this also deactivated the user. It unchecked this user is active box, so that user is no longer part of this system. There's no way they would be able to log in, anything like that. All right. So one other thing I did want to mention is you can bulk edit users. So if there's anything I want to do to multiple users simultaneously, I can just check off their names here and then edit selected. And here I can change most of the different fields that we have available. So if I want to, bulk set users to inactive, I can update that. I can also add multiple administrators in one location. So if I want to just set all of these users up as admins, I could do that as well, or set any of the, just kind of basic information. I can change their user role, their language, locale, time zone, etc. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and skip over groups for one moment and jump right into roles and permissions. So all roles except for the no access role can be customized. So don't feel confined by these. You can add more user roles as you need to, or just adjust the existing roles. So feel free to create any number of roles or modify or delete the default roles as you see fit. You are not limited to what's available out of the box. That said, within TestRail, there are 5 default roles for the most common use cases that we've identified with our users. If you do want to use these, we're going to walk through the different levels of permissions for each to get a good idea of what they can do and the different privileges that are available. So for read-only, no permissions are checked here. You can view anything in the instance. You don't have any restrictions on what you can see, but you can't add anything, you can't edit or modify anything, and you wouldn't be able to delete anything. This is a great role for managers that may want access to kind of check out the status of testing, but wouldn't actually be going in to change or interact with any of the information directly. All right, and we also have the tester role. So by default, this user can add new test runs and test plans, and then they can also add results to those tests and run reports. They won't be able to add new test cases or modify the structure of your, your test case hierarchy, change the suites, or add any milestones or anything like that. This is really good for frontline users and QA team members that won't be involved in the test planning side, but will be running tests and adding their results. Let's go back. And then the designer role. This one is similar to the tester, but it does have the ability to create test cases and sections. So this, they still wouldn't be able to make suites or milestones by default, but this is a team member that can jump in and actually make some, do some of the planning within an already structured project and create new test cases and essentially set up what they want to be tested. This is good for team members that are responsible for designing their tests, like business analysts that help write test cases for new features. And then the last one we have that's available here is the lead. This is the default role that's given, just automatically. This has the most access of all of our out-of-the-box roles. It can do everything we've already mentioned, as well as add and delete milestones and suites, and then also close test runs. So only 2 permissions are not granted to this user by default, and that's the modify test results and delete closed test runs. So within the system, all users can edit the test results that they specifically add to a test within a specified time window. Granting the modify test results permission allows this user to edit other users' results. So this should only be granted to the highest level of user, somebody that you trust, not to go changing anything. So this is definitely something that we do keep restricted by default. You can add a user and it that has this permission, but they should really be very careful with it. You don't want to go modifying anything that's going to affect your traceability or auditing later on. The ability to delete closed test runs is similar. So this is something that you cannot undo once a test run has been deleted. That information is gone unless you do a full database restore. So there's not, so this, we really want to make sure that no user has the ability to kind of, irrevocably remove information that you might need for later auditing or just traceability in general. So the main thing to note with these roles is that there are granular permissions for interacting with each entity in TestRail. So you can customize the user access for your team. As I said, you can create new roles or modify these roles to really give whatever access your users might actually need. There is one last role that I want to talk about that's not here. It cannot be modified and it cannot be updated, and that is the no access role. So this is a hidden role. It cannot be edited, but it does show when you are editing a user. So if I go into this user and then check their access, I can see the no access role here. So basically, when a user has the no access role, if they go to the dashboard, they're not going to see anything there. They won't have any permissions to view anything or see anything. They just have access to log into the instance. This is really useful as a blanket permission. So you have greater control as an administrator over who can access what, because you would be able to go and if they have the no access permission, they can't see anything unless you go in and specifically give them access to different projects. And then once you give them access to those projects, then they'd be able to see that information. So this is a good, just default role that you might want to give to somebody so that when they log in, they can't see anything until they've been specifically added to the projects that you want them to view. So one other topic that we want to get into here is going to be the project level administrators. In order to get started with project level administrators, you are going to want to set up a new role for them. And if you've got project level administrators active and set up, then you can go ahead and go into the add role section here. And you'll see there's a second set of permissions that are available for these users. So we're going to go ahead and just check the box here. So this is a granular set of admin privileges for users that might be responsible for individual projects, but who don't need global administrative privileges. You don't want to give them all of the access to the instance, but you do want to give them some of the access so they can jump in and make changes to their specific projects without needing to bother one of the global administrators. So when editing or adding a new role, if you are using the enterprise TestRail instance, you'll have the option to give these additional permissions. So they have limited admin powers specifically based around projects that are assigned to them. And the options that they have available are the ability to add or edit add or edit projects that will be automatically assigned to them. They can also delete projects that are assigned to them. And then they can also add or edit new custom fields or custom test case templates. So if you do have a field that you need specifically in a project that you're administrating, you don't want to have to bother one of the global admins to go in and create this brand new field that's going to show up on everybody's instance or in everybody's projects. You can, as a project level administrator, jump in, create your own field, add all your own values. Those will still be available for other project level administrators or global administrators. So if you create a field and other team members think that it could be useful for their projects, then they'll have the ability to go into the customizations menu and set that up as well. But by default, any case field that is created by a project level administrator will only apply to that user's projects. User variables are another thing that project level administrators can set up. User variables are used for integrations. So if you have one team on your instance that's using a Jira instance, and then another team with a different project level administrator is integrating with GitHub instead, then they would be able to set up their own integration within the project that would be specific to that project, to that GitHub instance. And the user variables allows them to define the actual, like the variables that users will use to log into that, to authenticate with that separate integration. So that's really useful for team members to have access to, just to make sure that their integrations are working as great as possible. And then finally, you can give project level administrators the ability to add users. Any user that's added by a project level administrator will by default have the no access role, but they will be granted the whatever the default role you have in the system for the projects that they manage. So if I'm a project level administrator, I'm managing one of my projects and I add a user, that user won't be able to see anything except for the projects that I control. And I cannot give them access to any of the other projects in the instance. All right, so that's the basis of what the project level administrators can do in the system. Let's go ahead and take a look at user groups. I'm gonna go ahead and jump back into our users and roles settings here, and we'll go over into user groups. So user groups are pretty simple to set up. You can create a new group, give it a name, and then all you need to do is just check off the boxes for the people you want to be included in that group. I'm just going to grab a few of these people here. All right, so now we've got 6 users in our QA team group that we just set up. And now, actually, let's go ahead and jump over to this instance here. What makes user groups so powerful is that when you're editing a project, you can grant individual users. So if I'm editing this project and I go into my Access tab, I can give all of my individual users their different permissions or different roles based on their project. Or based on what they should be able to do inside of this project. So if this person shouldn't be able to read it, this person should have no access by default. They shouldn't be able to see anything that's going on in here. I can go ahead and change each of these users' individual access to this project. I also have a project lead defined in some of these instances. And now if I go down, I can also see the full groups of users. So I can set a blanket access role for all of these users in the group at one time. So if I want all of these users to be have the lead role that are in this group, then they'll have it. And then if I need to, I can update individual users within that group to have different roles. So the hierarchy is a global role is going to be what a user has by default in any project. If the project does have its own access. So in this case, the default access to this project is no access. No one will be able to see this project unless we give them or a group that they're in specific permission to interact with this specific project. So they'll have the access to the global role. If I do want to just give them the global role, that'll be whatever is defined here, is how they'll be able to interact with this project. I can also just give them, any other specific role I need to, or I can do that on the group level here. So groups are often overlooked and underutilized. So for larger teams, we do recommend setting them up. It can be a huge time saver in how you manage your user access to all of the different projects that you have set up internally. One other thing to note is that all users do have their own profile settings. So I mentioned when we were at the beginning here that all users will have the ability to set their own settings for certain aspects of the instance, so they can come in and change the language, the theme, and that's all done under their name in the top right corner, and then go to My Settings, and that'll be where you can find your user profile information. On this page, you can also set up API keys, and then let's see, I don't know if I have a, there is another tab that will show up here. If you've got user variables configured for an external integration, then that will show up here. Let me see if I can find an instance where I can demonstrate that here. So if I go into my settings in this instance, you'll see I have the settings tab. And then I do have a Jira Jira integration configured, and this lets me set my individual user login along with for that Jira integration, so that when I'm attempting to interact with anything inside of Jira, it's going to use these credentials to log me in and access that information. All right. All right, so let's go over into the site settings page here, just to cover a couple things that we've kind of talked about. So if we go into site settings, there are some security features that I want to take note of here. So if I go into the security tab, I can define my own password policy. So I can choose from one of the one of the options that we have here that's going to require capital and lowercase numbers and special characters and a specific character length. Or if you're familiar with regex, you can set up your own password policy here as well, just to note, just to force users to set up, any kind of specific rules that you want to enforce. On this page, you can also toggle options for the forget password option. So, when you're on the user login page at the very beginning, when you're first, logging into the instance, you will have that forgot password option that'll take you through that forget password flow. This will disable that completely. So if somebody does lose their password, they need to jump back in and re-access the system. This is going to, make it to where they're going to need to contact an administrator in order to have their password updated. You can also change the, disable the invite user emails. So if somebody adds a new user, as I showed you, can either choose to set their password manually or have it send an email to them, which will prompt them to create a password once they log in. With this checked, then they won't receive that email, and an admin would need to go in and actually manage that themselves. You can also restrict access to only specific IP addresses. This is useful if you want to set up access to only users in a specific location, or if you have users that connect through a specific VPN or something like that, then this is handy to make sure that only people from the right location are authenticating. So I mentioned earlier that editing test results can only be done within a specified time limit. The setting for that can be found under the User Interface tab inside of our administration menu on the site settings page. You'll see this option here for editing test results, and that is how long a user has to edit their own test results. This also does affect any user that has the modify test results permission added. So even if you are a team lead that's been granted the permission to modify other users' results, by default, you would only be able to modify that result within 1 day of it being added. You can change this. So, if you don't want anybody to ever edit their test results for any reason whatsoever, you can disable it completely. Alternatively, you can set it to unlimited and have people be able to make those changes anytime, forever. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the external user management options. I think, this is the right one. So I do have SSO configured in this instance. So I've set up an Okta configuration. Now let's jump over into, let's just open a new window here. All right, it's just going to be an incognito window, so I'm not already logged in. All right, and let's take me to the login page, and you'll see I do have this single sign-on button here. Let's go ahead and log in, and now I can log in with my Okta credentials. Oh. Well, it's going to take me just a moment here. All right, everybody, I'm going to hide this. All right, there we go. So I filled in that information and it just logs me directly into the system using that single sign-on. I just did all of that authentication directly through Okta rather than logging in directly into my instance. So this is really useful for a number of different reasons, and it does support any SAML 2.0 provider such as Okta, Azure AD, Google, and many more. This is an enterprise-specific feature, so if you do want to take advantage of single sign-on within TestRail, you would need to check out our enterprise offerings. With SSO active, you can configure it so that users are given access to TestRail within the identity provider rather than doing it individually. So let's go ahead and just take a look at our settings here. So users, you can set it to where if a user is given access inside of, let's just say Okta, then if they haven't ever used TestRail before, then you can have it create them an account when they try to access TestRail for the first time. Within Okta as well, you will have an option to just click on a TestRail button and it'll automatically launch it for you if you've been given that access inside of Okta. But you can disable this. So if you do want you want it to only match up with users that already exist in the system, that's also doable. Inside of Okta, the main thing to note is that when you are configuring a user and giving them access to TestRail and to the TestRail application, then you just need to make sure that the email address that is configured for that application matches up with what the email address is in TestRail. As long as those are the same, then they will automatically connect and that user will just be able to start using the SSO login directly. It's also possible to disable the fallback authentication for all non-admin users. So this prevents your standard users from accessing TestRail through traditional login methods. So if you don't want users to use their basic TestRail username and password, then this is going to set it up to where they are going to have to use that SSO login. We do keep that restricted, so all administrative users will always be able to log in with their username and password, just in case something happens within the identity provider, users can't actually log in, there's connection, something is not working right. We don't want it to where you're going to be completely locked out of your instance because you're forcing to use SSO. So with that in mind, we do have all admins will always be able to use their traditional login. So one thing I did want to mention is that we do have for TestRail server users, we do also support LDAP and Active Directory integrations. For that, you'll set up a localized script on your server that would grant users of that local directory inside of your system direct access into the TestRail system, which can be pretty useful. It's kind of similar to single sign-on, but it's kind of more of a it's locally configured and locally stored, so it's not quite the same. But if you'd like to find out more information about that, we do have documentation on our website, including the sample scripts and just some information on how to update those in order to work. All right, but that's going to be pretty much our demonstration here today. We've got a little bit of time for some questions and answers, it looks like. So let's go ahead and see if we've got anything to take a look at here. Let's see, can you reconfirm what the time zone impacts? I have a project with users in several time zones. So really the time zone is just going to be what displays for the user. It's not actually going to change the way anything is recorded. Whatever time zone you have set as your application default, which is going to be under site settings, you can set it to use server time zone by default. That's just going to be, I believe it's just UTC in our case, but you can set this to whatever time zone you'd like. And that's going to be what it's using to record information. And then beyond that, any user can set their own time zone by going into their account. But this is really just going to display, kind of relatively what time things occurred. So if I'm looking at, a test result inside of my system, let's just go ahead and take a look at a test run here. If I'm looking at this test result, I see this happened at 1:43 p.m. That's what time this was recorded based on the system default. I haven't actually changed any of this. But if I go into my user settings and change my time zone here, go ahead and update this. Now let's go back to that same project. We should see that this time changed. I don't think it did because I think I have this set to the same, had that set to the same time zone for myself. Let me try to change it again here. Let's just do a completely different update. This is what it should be updating. If it's not, then I might have to talk to our product team here. Let's go ahead and jump back in here. I might also just need to refresh it if it's not changing it. Yeah, see, now it changed. Yeah, so now we're seeing this as 7:43. So it's really just kind of updating the time relatively. So it's showing me what time, my local time, everything happened rather than the time the original user recorded it. So that's really the main use for time zones in the system. All right, if a forgotten user has never logged in, should that user be edited with the next new user info when adding users to TestRail? I think I see what you're saying. So if a person has logged in, if you've got a forgotten user, let me go ahead and change this. I don't know that I mentioned this earlier. You can do filtering on users now. So if you want to see, all of the users that are administrators specifically, or you want to find users of a specific status, like inactive or active, you can do that using our filtering up here. But let's go ahead and, so if I have this forgotten user, they've never logged in, they've never really interacted with anything, it is possible for me to go in and just edit the user, give them a different full name, a different email address, and have them be change what that user has access to. That's possible. I don't know if I'd really recommend it, but I don't see why that would be a problem, as long as the user, has all of the information that they, or that the user hasn't really interacted with anything. The main reason why I wouldn't think to do that is to just prevent if that user has made any changes or made any updates in the system, or they've added any results. You don't necessarily want those to be falsely attributed to the newer user that you're adding in. But if they've never logged in before, they've never accessed the account, and it's just kind of this forgotten account that's sat there for a while, yeah, I don't see why that would be a problem. The only thing that you might have that might be a little bit weird is just that it's going to show that the user was created earlier than they actually were, but I don't know that that information really displays anywhere by default. So yeah, I don't see really any major problem with that. All right, so it looks like we have a number of questions about forgetting users. Let's see, I just wanted to confirm that if I forget a user, all the test results they recorded will still be preserved in TestRail. Is this correct? Yes. So that's the reason we do forget rather than having like an actual deletion. We don't want to remove anything that the user has ever interacted with. And in order to preserve that, we just use this forget function. And if I'm using, so let's go ahead and just take a look at a random user in the system here. I don't think I've got any users that have actually made any changes in the instance right now. So that's going to be a little bit challenging. Do I have any? What user made this change? I think it was probably me. Yeah, I don't. You cannot forget yourself. that's one thing to note. And you cannot forget. You can't forget the very first user that was ever added into the system. The user ID 1. The person who set up the account cannot be forgotten. You can kind of manually forget them by just removing all of their information from the account, but you wouldn't be able to use the forget user function for those users. So yeah, this is just to show if I were to forget myself here, then this test would still show up. This test result would still show up, but instead of saying my name here, it would just have that that really long, like this kind of name here. All right, can I edit a user once it is forgotten? Can I edit a user once it is forgotten? For example, adding a Z in front of their name so that they automatically sort to the bottom of my user list. Yes, that is possible. You can also kind of filter as I was doing up here. So if you just want to get rid of the inactive users and only show active users in the account, you can set that up using the filtering. But if I did want to kind of jump in here, and one thing to note is you can sort by any of these by clicking on the column type. So if you do want to sort by last active or sort by active inactive, you can do that there. So you can also sort by inactive just to put these at the bottom if you don't want them to be completely, completely hidden. Alternatively, yeah, if I want to go in and just edit this, I can do like that to keep them at the very bottom of the page. If I do filter by user or sort by user, so that'll show up there. Can I re-invite a user after I have forgotten them? Should I edit their old account which was forgotten, or will they appear as a new user? So one thing to note is if you are going to use a forgotten user's information, you will need to make sure you go into the Access tab and remark them as active. Otherwise, this user will never be able to log in again. Typically, we would recommend probably creating them a new account unless you do want all of their old information to still be associated with their account. So you could go in and re-edit this information to reflect that existing user, or to reflect that old user. If the main reason that we have the forget this user option is so that if people are leaving the company, they're no longer with you, and you don't want any of their information stored in your system, that's when you would forget a user. If you just want to deactivate a user, but they might come back into the system later on, we would recommend just going into the Access tab and unchecking the this user is active option. And you can do that with any user. You don't actually have to to forget them in order to mark them as inactive. And an inactive user is not going to count towards your monthly billing. So this is a really good way to set up to kind of remove that user access without forgetting the user entirely, so that if you do want them to come back in later, you do want to keep the record of who it is that was interacting with different things in the system. You don't have to forget them. You can just mark them as inactive and then reactivate them when it's time to later on. All right, are forgotten users included in the count of active users? No. I do want to stress that once you forget a user, it will automatically mark them as inactive. Any user that you've unchecked that box for this user is active is also going to not count towards your subscription count. So both of those are going to be ways that you can kind of bring down that subscription count every month. That's how we recommend managing that. So you are going to want to make sure that any of the users that are in the system are marked as active if they should be able to access the system, or inactive if you don't want them to count towards your regular subscription. Can you disable forgot password just for users that are inactive? So can an inactive user log in? So inactive users won't be able to log into the TestRail account. Even they using that forgot password button, it's not going to help them. They're not going to be able to access the system. Inactive users cannot log into TestRail. So the forget password functionality isn't really going to have too much of an effect on those users. Even if they did manage to reset their password, they're still not going to be able to log in if they're inactive. All right, once SSO is enabled, does that mean all the users will be forced to log in via SSO only? Only if there are, if they do have the not forgot. Let me go into site settings, go over to SSO. So authentication fallback is the setting that we have for that. So with the SSO enabled, if you have this box unchecked for authentication fallback, then your users will have to use SSO to log in. That is strictly for non-admin users. Admin users will always have the option to log in via SSO or via traditional means, but for all of your other users, if you do not have authentication fallback checked, then they will be forced to use SSO. All right, are there plans to display the group associated with each user on the users table? We have a large number of users, and that would be useful as a quick reference which users are associated with which group. There's, depending on the size of the instance and how many users and how many groups you have, that could get really busy really quickly, which I think is one of the reasons we haven't kind of implemented that. just because having like a list of all of the potential groups that a user might be in could get overwhelming when you're looking at it just kind of on the basic user page. For that reason, you can go in and see what groups the user is in individually. And then also you can go into your groups and see what users are available in each of the groups. But there's not a way to, just kind of easily see from this main users page which groups they're assigned into. That's something that we can look at in the future. I'm not entirely sure how we would make it display without looking a little bit too busy, but that is something that we can certainly look into. And I'll make sure that we pass that feedback along to the product team. All right, does a user who never logged in, are they considered a licensed user? Yes, if they are marked as active. So the licensed users in the instance are any user that has the status of active. If they are not logging in and they aren't using the application, mark them as inactive if you do not want them to count towards your billing. It has nothing to do with actual activity, in the system. It's just whether or not they're marked active or inactive. All right. If a user belongs to a group and the role for the group is set to be different from the one set at the user level, which role will prevail? The one set at the user level. So the hierarchy is going to be the global role, and then the project role, and then the group role, and then the individual product role or user role. So, if you have, by default, your project is set to just be the global, the global access. So let's say this is, default access is global role. Then each one of these users would have their global role. And when they log in, they'd be able to see and interact with this project based on what their global role is. If I set an individual group to have a specific access, but then I want a different user or a user of that group to have different privileges, I would set that on the user level. So the user level is going to supersede everything else. Whatever I specify for a user in my project, that is going to be what access they have in that project. If I haven't specified anything here, then it's going to go to the group access if their group has any special permissions, and if not, then it's just going to be whatever the default access for that project is. Let's see, can I set up reports to automatically email all members of a group instead of having to list them individually in the report setting? Not currently, but that's a great idea. I hope we're taking notes here. I think that's when you're setting up a report, just to kind of quickly demonstrate here, if I want to set up a report, when I am going through and choosing who's going to receive who's going to receive this email, it is going to give just a list of users here. I can select all of the users I want to receive a copy of this report, but there's not an option for groups there. But that is a good idea. I'll definitely pass that along to the product team. All right, and let's see, is there a date on which a month will be counted for billing on a user? For example, if the user is deactivated on 2nd March, he would be included for March usage. Yes, if like whatever, so billing isn't necessarily based on specific users, but total active user account, like total active user count. So if I have, if I go into my users, let's say I've got, I'm using a cloud instance and I have set up an annual payment for 20 users. And then even for 5 minutes, I have 21 users active, and then I deactivate one of those users, so I'm back down to 20. For that month, you would be billed for the 21 to 40 user count. If something like that happens and it's a very specific case, try reaching out to the support team. We'll do what we can to assist with that. But it is based on total active user account for the entire month. With cloud, you can, if you go over your, whatever specific user allotment you have, it's going to be flexible and it'll just charge you, the next billing cycle will charge for that updated level. If you are on TestRail server, then you will have a specific number of seats and you will not be able to add any additional users once you've hit that user count. I hope that answers the question. I know it can be a little bit confusing there, but it's just based on total number of active users at any one time throughout the month. So always, if you're adding new users and you're worried about going over that level, deactivate all your users first and then add in the new users. All right, and this is going to be our last question today. Does the person who handles the billing need to be an active user? No, not really. The person that handles the billing, so there is a separate billing portal inside of for TestRail users. It's going to be like the secure.gurock.com. I would open it, but I think ours has got a lot of internal stuff, so I don't necessarily want to broadcast that. But we do have, but there is a billing portal or a customer portal that is separate from the TestRail login. The logins there are totally different from the logins you would use to actually access your instance. There's not really any direct link between them. The people that have access to the customer portal can log in and pay their bill. And if you're using TestRail server, that is also where you will download new upgrade files. So if you are ready to upgrade your installation, that's where you would go to get the new files. But beyond that, there's not really any reason for those users to log in if they're not going to be using the software. So you do not need to set them up with an account directly. That's totally fine. And if you do want to add more users to that billing account, you can reach out to our CSM team and they'll be happy to help out with that. All right, so that's gonna go ahead and finish up our presentation for today. I know we're like right at time now. Again, my name is Jacob Scott. I've been with TestRail for quite a long time, and I hope you all were able to learn a little bit today. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining.